after Blood and Guts was over, after AEW went off the air and before Rampage started to tape, the Elite and the BCC, they shook hands. So this was like only in front of the live crowd. They shook hands and hug and whatever. Seems like that beef has been squashed, which I like the way they did it. And then after that, Kenny Omega took the mic and he was thanking the audience and yada, yada, yada. And then he said something very interesting. And I want to get your take on this. He said that he made it very clear that he will follow the Young Bucks and the Elite wherever they go next. He said it was something to that effect. There's an actual transcript out there. I apologize. I didn't actually have the full transcript in front of me, but it was something to that effect. And it made me think that he is teasing a potential Elite leaving AEW.
I think it's a possibility. A lot of people, I mean, everybody's seen in the wrestling media has reported that they believe the Elite's going to extend their contracts there. I think it's probably more likely since Vince McMahon came back. But at the same time, I also believe that, issues they've had with the company, issues they've had with, online and social media, also this huge payday they could potentially get from WWE is going to maybe sway them a little bit. I've been a little bit more skeptical that they'll re-sign just because I think at some point they're going to see the money from WWE, and I don't think Tony values them like he did.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the right attitude to have. CM Punk's great, but he's on borrowed time. And you can say the same thing about Omega and the Bucks, but they're a little bit younger, and they have an established track record of being able to contribute outside of just being, guys in the ring and on the microphone. And they're just the brand of the whole company's based on them. And I think that would just be a gigantic mistake. I think it'd be a nearly fatal mistake for Tony Khan to do that, to let them get away. But I think, I don't know. What I've been told is that I don't know if they've signed or extended yet. It's been real quiet. These kind of things tend to be that way when Tony Khan's dealing with them. But it wouldn't surprise me if they left. It wouldn't surprise me if they stayed. I honestly think the better chances for them staying, just because I don't think they would want to work for Vince McMahon at this point.
Yeah. And so I think I've been kind of like 50-50, but that might sound like a cop out. So I'm going to say 51-49 that they stay. I think it's more likely, that they stay. However, I think since the CM Punk drama started last year, and since CM Punk has now come back, he's back into the fold. He's doing his stuff on Collision. I think it's only a matter of time before you start seeing CM Punk more often on Dynamite. I just get the feeling because Turner's going to want their top star, and he is their top star, by the way. Turner's going to want their most popular guy on their more popular program to drive those numbers up. I just get the feeling that's what's going to happen eventually. I think it makes sense for them. Like, now would be the time to go. The unfortunate part, and this is actually a good thing, and Dave talked about this on his show, and we've been covering the MLW lawsuit of WWE. That lawsuit is kind of preventing them from being able to talk to WWE like they would have in the past, which it would have been illegal in the past too. But they don't really know what they're getting into. So I'm thinking they need to at least, if I were them, unless they get like this blowaway offer that they can't refuse from AEW, I would at least let the deals run out so that way you can even talk to the other side just to see what they got going on, right? Athletes do it all the time in legitimate sports, right? Like they will wait for their contract to expire, and then they'll hit that free agency period, and they kind of will have they'll know what their range is, and then once they figure out like exactly what they're worth, and then at that point, then they start really hard negotiating with teams, and then a lot of times they go back to their original team, but they still want to play the field. I think that's what these guys need to do, because I feel like they're super, super valuable to AEW. But if WWE gets them, that is a huge blow to the competition. That would be like getting your other teams like starting quarterback and like their top middle linebacker, and a couple of offensive linemen from their team and putting them onto your team. And now you got to play each other twice a year in the division, right? Like that is such a huge deal to me. They might not be the biggest draws in AEW, but they're the lifeblood of that company. Like there
Yeah,
is no company without these guys.
I
I think it's hugely important for AEW to re-sign them. But I do know that Tony Khan, if he had to pick between Punk and the Elite, he's going with Punk. I know that.
yeah, and that's a mistake on his part, but um, I mean, pay-per-view buys wise, Punk is definitely the guy who kind of elevated them as far as pay-per-view buys go. But also, I think that people kind of underestimate what draws the Elite are. Um,
Yeah.
I think if you look at what they've been able to do, even since the Ring of Honor, New Japan, I mean, they made it possible for New Japan to sell arenas out here. Ring
Mm-hmm.
of Honor was able to do the biggest crowds in its history here because of those guys. I mean, they were big enough. Those 4 or 5 guys, along with Cody, were big enough to help to get a number 2 company in the business. They created this whole atmosphere. I don't think you can. That to me is a lot bigger than being a pay-per-view draw.
Yeah.
I mean, being able to change the atmosphere of the business to me is such a bigger deal than just what traditional wrestlers have been able to do. Um, and to me, that makes them even more valuable in the marketplace. I think also, on a pro WWE look, um, they haven't been there. There's a lot of great matchups for them there. And I
Mm-hmm.
think right. I think they push this. I mean, I think they'd be dumb not to take this past their contracts expiring and seeing what they can get. Because once their contracts expire, that's where things get a little bit interesting. Because then, I mean, that's where kind of like with Cody, I don't think he was ever planning to go to WWE. I don't think he was ever planning to leave AEW. I think they were planning on he was going to work it out, or maybe he goes to Hollywood if it gets bad enough. But it was just they did the old school grit negotiation technique with Cody, which is they just kept giving him more offers.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they just wouldn't say no. They kept coming back, and he ended up with this remarkable deal. And if they match something like that, I don't know how you say no to that. Look how well it's worked out for Cody. He's got to keep his music, his look. He does a lot of his own creative. He's the top baby face in the company. It's worked out remarkably well for him. I don't know how you don't even entertain that. And I'm not a WWE fan either. It's just not the style of wrestling I grew up liking. I can appreciate the product for what it is, but I mean, I don't know how you say no to that if you're the Elite. On the other hand, though, that Vince McMahon's an issue for those guys. I can tell you that. And I know that for certain. I can also say that, this is the company they feel they had a huge hand in being a part of and helping to make exist. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's important to them. There's a lot of people in that company that are there because of those guys. And I also feel that they feel a certain responsibility to them for that.
Yeah, so there's so many people that have jobs in AEW be, because not and I'm going to say this and I'm not trying to sound mean, but they got those jobs not because they were qualified for the jobs, but because they had a relationship with the Bucks and with
Yeah.
Omega. And that's not a bad thing, by the way.
I mean,
I'm all about getting your yeah,
network.
I yeah, it's just networking. It's about getting your boys jobs, and I'm not even saying that those guys are doing bad jobs. I'm saying they probably weren't even qualified for the jobs when they got them, but they're being kept on, and they might be qualified now. They're very likely doing a great job. Like one of the young bucks, his wife is like running the merch department, right?
Well,
Like or a big part of it. And so
well, see,
and it's like
probably the most qualified person in the company to be running what she does. I mean, she came into
yeah,
that position having more experience than Tony Khan did as a booker or anything else. Dana Massey, she ran the entire Bullet Club and Elite and the Jacksons, Omegas, all their T-shirt and merch operations out of her own living room.
yeah,
Her operation was insane. She came up with a lot of the ideas for the T-shirts. I remember back in the day, I even had people tell me that they believed she was maybe the head of the Bullet Club. As far as American guys were, the Ring of Honor side of the guys, and I mean, it was true. I mean, just if you look at I know at one point their merch sales were equal to what they were getting from Ring of Honor, which I think was a little over
mm-hmm.
$250,000 a year. That was the biggest contracts Ring of Honor ever getting out, and they were getting more or a little. They were getting more equal to that on all those years of that contract from the merch sales, and a lot of that was because of Dana Massey. But you're right as far as like a lot of the other names that people know about. Those guys came to those jobs because it's like, okay, we don't know anybody else. We don't have
Mm-hmm.
it else. We're gonna go with the guys we know. We're going to go with guys we know that are smart. And yeah, they've grown into those positions, but that's networking. That's life. That's that's the business. And I mean, look at Tony Khan. He wasn't qualified to be a wrestling booker, but he's done a pretty good job of it.
Yeah. So sometimes you might. So the word deserve is such a stupid word.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? Because like nobody really deserves certain things in life, right? Sometimes you just get opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And
People
sometimes you just luck into them. Tony Khan's a guy that was born on third base, right? But
Yeah.
look what he's done with what he's been given, right? And and I think that is admirable. Vince McMahon, also a guy. Third base is probably strong. Second base, probably. Let's just go ahead and say he was born at second base, running towards third base, with his dad being a wrestling promoter, right? In the biggest market.
I think Vince McMahon was running. I think he was born running towards home when a pass ball went past the catcher. But
well, I'm just saying his dad wasn't a billionaire like Tony Khan's dad. So I'm just saying like,
but
like he probably didn't have the same amount of advantages, but to make it in wrestling business, he had the biggest advantage because he was taking over a company that had been around for ages, that he was like a third generation promoter. You know what I mean? So, and look at what he's done with the opportunity that he was given. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think that's okay. And I think that the guys that got their jobs because they had friends in AEW have seemingly done very good. I'm sure some of them didn't do very good, and I'm sure some of them are either probably not there or they're not still in those same positions. That happens, but there's a lot of people that are there because they were friends with the Young Bucks, so they got jobs because of the Young Bucks. Yeah. I feel like the Young Bucks, it could be a potential that they feel an obligation to those people. If I leave, those guys don't have protection anymore. Right. And my wife doesn't have protection anymore. My wife could be on the chopping block. So now what happens if we go, do all these people get hired by WWE? Well, that's not the way WWE operates. WWE, they're not going to hire your stooges. They just aren't. They want you, they want your brand, but the folks that you bring around you is not going to come with you.
Well, from what I understand is that their AEW deal right now is so, at least with the Bucks and with, Kenny Omega, I know their AEW deal, they're retired. They're good. The next deal is about, and this is how somebody backstage put it to me, their next deal is about taking care of their kids. All their colleges paid off and their retirement paid off. So that's what they're looking at. And I think they're also looking for, they want to cement their place in wrestling history. I think they already done that 10 times over. But I also think that they're probably looking for some new matchups, something a little different. But the thing is, they can also have that in AEW. I mean, there's one thing Tony Khan has been able to do is he'll go out and get the guys he wants, and he's also changed things up dramatically, sometimes from show to show if he feels the need. They're not, that won't be as pliable in WWE. I think it's going to be an interesting choice. I think a lot of the future of the business rides on what these guys decide to do. And if I were them, there's no way in heck I'd sign any deal to extend the contract before they become free agents. I'd want to hear everything that they're going to get thrown at them. And who knows? There may be a billionaire sitting out there somewhere who wants to jump into this.
So you know what I mean? So I was, and I'm not saying Freddie Prinze Jr., but let's just say Freddie Prinze Jr., right? Because he's a guy, not a billionaire, but he's a guy that probably has access to wealth, right? Famous guy. His dad was super famous. His dad, I just watched the, if you guys have Paramount Plus, the Showtime and Paramount Plus are the same now. And so I watched a documentary on the Comedy Store, and they did a deep dive into Freddie Prinze. And I was like, and I knew about Freddie Prinze, but I didn't really know just how famous he really was in the 70s. Guy was incredibly famous and a big time stand-up comedian. And so he's like, now Freddie Prinze Jr., he's super famous, got access to all his wealth. His wife is Sarah Michelle Gellar, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So he's been saying he's going to start his own promotion. Now, this is not going to happen, but I'm like, maybe there could be another guy like a Tony Khan out there or like a Freddie Prinze. It's like, hey, I got some scratch. You got all of the elite coming due at the same time. Oh, and guess what? In January or February, Will Ospreay's contract is due. Oh, guess what? Drew McIntyre's contract's coming up due.
Yeah.
Who else in WWE's got a contract coming up? Oh, and then in Impact, their contracts are only 6 months at a time. I could take half that promotion by the end of the year. Right. And then you really got something.
Yeah. The thing is people are going to say, the money's not out there, but people forget just how huge wrestling was for a lot of people that's in their 30s and 40s that are in these high positions. That's how MJF and Chris Jericho won a Best of the Year award from the New York Times. That never happens in any other decade, but to many of the people that are 30s and 40s that are in the high echelons of journalism or finance, they grew up with these shows. They grew up. They don't have the stigma to them that was previous. So, like Tony Khan is like ultimately the ultimate example of that. But also, there's no telling there's not some other people out there who would have interest in doing it, especially after seeing the success Tony's had. Especially after seeing the cutting that scripted television's getting in favor of something like Dynamite, which could be getting $1 billion anywhere. I think it's gonna be about a $500 million, but they're talking about maybe $1 billion TV deal at some point. But there's no telling there might be somebody else out there. But I just think that I think the business is just doing really well right now. And I think for Omega and the Bucks, it's like if you're gonna make that move to WWE, this is a good time to do it. And I think that if they want to stay with AEW, I think they have a lot of leverage there. They may not. I don't think they're going to get CM Punk canned, but doesn't mean they're not going to get everything else that they want. And I don't even know if they want Punk canned necessarily. I don't think the hate there is as thick as people want to believe. But I do think that eventually you're going to see, when they make that decision, I think it's going to be seismic when they just make the decision where they're going to end up going.
Yeah, and one thing that adds a little bit to their leverage, and adds leverage to WWE, it adds leverage to AEW, it adds leverage to anybody that's seeking television money, is the longer this strike goes on in Hollywood with the writers and now the Screen Actors Guild, I think TV companies and streaming companies are going to start looking into more non-union entertainment, which is exactly what pro wrestling is. Because you've had strikes in the NFL, you've had strikes in baseball, there's been strikes in NBA, NHL, all of it. They never really lasted all that long, but those are very probable situations to happen again. But pro wrestling and mixed martial arts and boxing, never going to get a strike. It just isn't going to happen because those are all individualized sports and none of them care about each other. They all want to get the best money that they can for themselves, and that's it. So there won't be any collective bargaining. You're not going to have to worry about them ever unionizing. Jesse Ventura's gone. He's not going to try that anymore. I think they should unionize, but they never will because they can never get it together. So I think the TV corporations are going to find pro wrestling to be a bit more valuable now than they once were.
Yeah, that the writer's strike definitely helps them. So same with the actor strike. I don't think people realize just how big the differences are right between the writers and actors in the studios right now. And I'm going to compliment the Young Bucks and BTE. Ryan Nemeth, who obviously he's a member of the Screen Actors Guild. He's been on the picket lines out in LA with the writers and the actors for months on BTE, interviewing him, talking to him. And there's been some really notable writers that's popped up that he's talked to. He's had some of the best strike coverage that I've seen. I'm just like, I didn't expect that out of the Hollywood hunk, but maybe he's got a journalism future there. But it's this, this is something that's going to go on for a while. I don't think it's going to be over before the end of the year. And there's just too much at stake for both sides. And the studios have made some really bad decisions towards streaming. And you also have you have little to no reason for the actors and writers to want to settle for what they're getting right now, which is pennies on the dollar, or micro, even decimals of pennies on the dollar. And I just think it's going to be an ongoing thing, and that plays into the TV deals, especially for WWE is going to be coming up next year, and same with AEW. I think there might be more bidders for them coming in, when their deals are up than probably normally would have happened.
Yeah, absolutely.